only thing we have to fear is
in war.
fear itself.
There is no substitute for victory.
Let us never negotiate out of fear.
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting hand in hand for the liberty we burn, for glory and honor, for our sons and daughters, ever mindful of the lessons we've learned. Let the torch of freedom burn.
President Calvin Coolidge said, "The more I study the Constitution, the more I realize that no other document devised by the hand of man has brought so much progress and happiness to humanity. To live under the American Constitution is the greatest political privilege that was ever accorded to the human race."
That it is. Welcome to the intersection of faith and politics. WallBuilders Live with David Barton and Rick Green. Today we've got Foundations of Freedom Thursday, so we're diving into those principles that made America great, and we're jumping into your questions as well. You can send them in to us at radio@wallbuilders.com. We got several we're going to get to today. David, thanks for doing these Foundations of Freedom Thursday, by the way. I know people really enjoy this. It's like opening up your library to them in many ways because you're going back to all those foundational documents you've got.
Well, it's a lot of fun because it also shows that, you know what, those old foundational documents still apply to everything that's going on today. And there's very few things that come up. As a matter of fact, we haven't had a question yet that's come up that can't be answered by some of those things out of the library. The history itself, or the Constitution, or the Declaration, or what the Founding Fathers said about certain issues. So, as the Bible says, there is nothing new under the sun, and these Foundation of Freedoms Thursday actually help us prove that.
All right, well, we'll jump right into some of the questions. Our first one comes from Jeremy in Indiana. He said, in my hometown of Lafayette, Indiana, the controversial bill of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act has been signed as law. There are a lot of people claiming this law will legalize discrimination of gays from Christians. I've read this law in its entirety and could not find this. Can you guys at WallBuilders explain what the law is, what it does, and how it affirms the religious freedom already given to us in the Northwest Ordinance during one of your future podcasts? Thanks. So, great question, David. In fact, we're getting several on this. We've gotten several posts on Facebook asking about this Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Everybody's saying, I hear the media saying that this discriminates, but I'm actually reading the law, and there's nothing in there that allows for, quote unquote, discrimination.
You know, let me take what Jeremy said there, because he says, I'm hearing and it's being reported, the media says, and he went and read the bill. Shout out to Jeremy for actually doing that, man. That is so cool that he didn't just believe what the media said, and lo and behold, he couldn't find it. I wonder why he couldn't find it, because it does not exist. The RFRA, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, passed in Indiana, has already been passed in 18 other states. Indiana is the 19th state. It was passed at the federal level in 1996, signed by President Bill Clinton with strong bipartisan support, both parties behind it. The Religious Freedom Restoration Act was to correct something the Supreme Court did. The Supreme Court came down in a case called Oregon v. Smith Employment Commission, and they said, you can violate someone's religious freedom. And they didn't give enough protections, I think at that time it dealt with smoking drugs or something else, and he claimed that was his religion. So they said, you can regulate those drugs, and even if he claims it's religion, you can violate his religious expression. And Congress said, whoa. You can't just violate someone's religious expression, even though this one dealt with the smoking of drugs. As I recall that case, even though this one dealt with smoking of drugs, there's a lot of other things that could come under this decision. And so Congress went back in and cleaned it up and said, look, you can only violate someone's religious freedom if there is a compelling government interest. You have to show clearly that it hurts the government unless you stop this. And you also have to use the less intrusive means. In other words, if you find an ant colony in your front yard, you don't call in a nuclear strike to kill the ant colony. You use the least intrusive means of solving that problem. And so that's the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. It took us back to where we had been for essentially 200 years under the Constitution, and said you do have a right to exercise your freedom of religion. So what happened is several states passed that. The feds have passed it. Several states have passed it to clarify things. And now we're seeing that people are being denied their free exercise of religion when it affects their conscience. In other words, you can't believe certain things. You can't believe that this is wrong for me to be involved in a homosexual wedding. It goes against my faith. You're trying to force me to be a photographer in one, and I don't want to do that. It's my business. I have the right to choose, and my faith tells me I cannot do this. That's freedom of religion, that you have a right to express your faith. That's why from the very beginning, back in 1640, in some of the first laws ever passed in America, they started with the protection of conscience, because that is the essence of your religion. What you believe, your conscience is what you believe and therefore what you do. That is the essence of your religion. That's what has to be protected. So the Religious Freedom Restoration Act is not a discrimination bill. It is a protection bill of the actual rights guaranteed in the First Amendment. And so what happens is all these guys on the progressive left come in and they want to see if it discriminates. And I would say that the media is a discrimination bill, because they're discriminating against people of faith, saying, hey, you cannot express your faith. We're not going to allow you to believe something and act on your beliefs. You will believe what we want you to believe, and we're going to coerce you in supporting things that you disagree with. We're going to make you participate in those things. Now, that's the real bigotry here. It's not that the bill is the bigots. It's those who are protesting the bill and those who are the media who has joined in the protest. That's where the bigotry comes in. That's where the discrimination comes in. It's a discrimination against people of faith because they're not submitting to the coercion to participate.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
the whole,
and that's what it is. It's coercion to. It's forcing you to do something against your conscience, rather than saying, hey, if you want to check out of this process or not participate in that transaction, you ought to have the right to do that.
And, quite frankly, this is really complicity with the media and other things. We talked about last Friday, Good News Friday. It's the same stupid thing as if I looked outside of town, I pointed at the water tower sitting on those four legs, and said, that is an alien spacecraft that has just landed in our community. And the media, rather than going out to see that it's a water tower, started reporting that an alien spacecraft has landed in our community, and they get the whole community stirred up over it. It has nothing to do with truth or fact or what's actually happening. They have taken a charge and they've repeated it as if it is the truth. And, Jeremy, bless his heart, he went back and actually read the bill and said there's nothing discriminatory in it. That's right. It's a protective bill to protect the First Amendment guarantees for free exercise of religion after the Supreme Court back in 1990 messed up the traditional interpretation of the First Amendment. Congress went in under Bill Clinton and fixed that and said, now we're back to constitutional understandings. And that's all this bill does. Now, what happened is, just before last election, Jan Brewer down in Arizona had this bill, and the left community, progressives, homosexuals, they all went ballistic, and they kowtowed her off of signing the bill, claiming it's discriminatory. And they said, oh, look, it worked there. Let's do it elsewhere. So here Mike Pence, Governor Pence of Indiana, signs the bill, and they go in screaming the same thing because it works so well in Arizona. Somebody's got to take the time to research this stuff. Media, shame on them for not doing so, for reporting what's actual truth. But, kudos to Jeremy for getting this thing right.
And one quick thing before we go to break, Dave, let's not forget, this is not about one particular religious issue or denomination. I mean, this protects the Amish from, being able to have the horse and buggies. This protects anybody.
The Christian
that has
Scientists don't have to get vaccinations. Jehovah's Witnesses don't have to say the Pledge of Allegiance. Jewish and Muslim guys don't have to shave their beards. Sabbatarians don't have to work on Saturdays. This protects every single conscience thing that's out there. Quakers don't have to be forced to fight in wars. This is not just about marriage, and that's a great point you make, Rick, because this is not a bill just to deal with marriage. Now, that's the latest thing in the crosshairs, but this protects everybody's traditional freedom of conscience that goes back all the way to 1640 in this tradition, and that's what this bill does.
Yeah, no doubt. We got to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Stay with us, folks. You're listening to WallBuilders Live.
Abraham Lincoln said, "We the people are the rightful masters of both Congress and the courts, not to overthrow the Constitution, but to overthrow the men who pervert the Constitution."
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. In the minds of many today, government is a purely secular institution and is not in any way to be joined to religious principles. The result is that too often our public policies are now enacted without any consideration of their spiritual consequences. However, the Founding Fathers believed that even a political act should always be examined from a spiritual viewpoint. For example, in his inaugural address, President George Washington declared, "We ought to be persuaded that the favorable smiles of heaven can never be expected on a nation that disregards the eternal rules of order and right which heaven itself has ordained." President George Washington believed that the blessings of heaven would reside on this nation only so long as its national policies embraced godly standards.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Thomas Jefferson said, "The constitutions of most of our states and of the United States assert that all power is inherent in the people, that they may exercise it by themselves, that is their right and duty, to be at all times armed, and that they are entitled to freedom of person, freedom of religion, freedom of property, and freedom of press."
Welcome back to WallBuilders Live, Foundations of Freedom Thursday today, diving into those principles that made America great and answering your questions about those principles. Be sure and send those in to radio@wallbuilders.com, and also visit our website, wallbuilderslive.com, for archives of our programs over the last few months. You can get more of these Foundations of Freedom Thursday programs there. I'm Rick Green here with David Barton, and we're going to take another question from you guys. This one comes from Dan. It says, "Dear David Barton, I'm writing in response to an email I got from a conservative group asking me to sign a petition asking Mitt Romney not to run for president. I thought about this and wondered if that's the best thing to do. Jeb Bush is looking to run for president. Chris Christie has been mentioned as a candidate, along with Romney. They would make three moderates vying for election. If conservatives can send one candidate to the primaries and the conservative vote will be given to one candidate, while the moderate vote will be spread out among three candidates. One of the reasons I believe Romney won the primary last election was because he was basically the only moderate, while there were many good conservatives running, which ended up splitting the conservative vote. I know you have a lot of experience and knowledge about politics. Does that make sense? Is it even possible to do?" So, David, just summary of the question makes sense. You know, that's exactly what happened in 2012. You had several good conservative candidates duking it out, and Romney was able to kind of ride that out in perfect storm and ended up with the nomination. So this guy's saying, look, what if, wouldn't it be better if you had Romney and Bush and Christie duking it out over the moderate vote, establishment vote, and then only one or maybe two good conservative candidates? Obviously, we can't control that, but what would be a better game plan there?
And let's talk about presidential politics for a bit, because it'll change a lot this year. Now, you got to understand, from a constitutional standpoint, really the only thing the feds can do with presidential politics is what relates to electorals and the Electoral College. So the process of when the electors vote, that's set, the feds control that. But how the election occurs, where it occurs, the tactics involved, that all belongs to the states. The time, the place, the manner of choosing their elected officials, their candidates, etc. Each state does that. That's why you have primaries. And if you have parties have the right to decide what's going to happen within their party. If you run outside the party, it doesn't matter what the Republicans or Democrats say, but if you run as a Democrat or Republican, you're bound by party rules. So from a constitutional standpoint, this gets back down into the territory of association. You can associate together to create political parties, the First Amendment right. You also have the right of the states deciding when the primaries will be and how that's done, whether it's by caucus or whether it's by primary. So having said all that, let's talk for a moment about the overall look at this, because as you look at 16 or 17 or 18 different Republican potential candidates that are looking at running, you can kind of split them into, as exactly as Dan did here, you can kind of say, well, you got the mods, the liberals over here, you got Romney and Christie and Jeb Bush. And I will say that Jeb Bush is not high on my preferred list, but I will also say that Jeb Bush's track record in Florida is very pro-life, very conservative, very pro-marriage, etc. I look at his staff. It concerns me, the staff that he's hired, but I will say that when I judge a tree by his fruits, what he did in Florida was much more conservative than either the other two Bushes did. So he is the most conservative of the three Bushes out there, but I don't like where he's on Common Core or immigration, etc. All right, that being said, that apart, Jeb is not really a liberal. He is what I would call more of a moderate, even though his voting record or his policies tend to be conservative. So the thought is, okay, if you can get Romney, and of course Romney has since declared he's not in, but if you can get a Christie, and if you can get a Jeb Bush in there fighting for the same clientele, because what happens typically in previous elections on the Republican side, you'll get a McCain, or you'll get a Romney, or you'll get a Dole, and they kind of run unopposed. And over on the conservative side, you got a dozen guys beating each other up, and what happens is the moderate just kind of stands off the side, and after all the blood and carnage is done, they walk in. And so that becomes a tactical consideration that has to be considered. Now, having said that, and having said, it's going to be a good thing for those guys to have to fight over there. And by the way, there's others I'd put there. Pataki is looking at running, the former governor of New York. There's several other folks that I would put over in that more not conservative camp, conservatives and less conservatives. But in doing that, people have to understand what's going to happen this year. It's never happened in their lifetime. The presidential primaries this year will be very, very, very different. And just to kind of set this up before we go to break, let me take you back to Romney. When he ran last time, he was the Republican nominee for president against Obama in 2012. And yet, if you look at the primaries where he ran, and I'm sitting here looking at them right now, in Minnesota, 83% of voters in Minnesota said, we do not want Romney as our nominee. In New Hampshire, 61% of Republicans in New Hampshire said, we don't want Romney as our nominee. South Carolina, 72% of Republicans said, we don't want him. 75% in Iowa, 75% in Missouri, 74% in Georgia, 65% in Colorado. You go, well, wait a minute. If 2/3 or 3/4 doesn't want Romney, how is it that he ended up being the nominee? And it was this way across the states. And so we'll kind of answer that when we come back.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. Stay with us, folks. We'll be back in a moment on WallBuilders Live.
Samuel Adams said, "The liberties of our country and the freedom of our civil constitution are worth defending against all hazards, and it is our duty to defend them against all attacks."
Have you noticed the vacuum of leadership in America? We're looking around for leaders of principle to step up, and too often, no one is there. God is raising up a generation of young leaders with a passion for impacting the world around them. They're crying out for the mentorship and leadership training they need. Patriot Academy was created to meet that need. Patriot Academy graduates now serve in state capitals around America, in the halls of Congress, in business, in the film industry, in the pulpit, and every area of the culture. They're leading effectively and impacting the world around them. Patriot Academy is now expanding across the nation, and now's your chance to experience this life-changing week that trains champions to change the world. Visit patriotacademy.com for dates and locations. Our core program is still for young leaders 16 to 25 years old, but we also now have a citizen track for adults. So visit the website today to learn more. Help us fill the void of leadership in America. Join us in training champions to change the world at patriotacademy.com.
Let the torch of freedom
Thomas Jefferson said, "In questions of power, then let no more be heard of confidence in man, but bind him down for mischief by the chains of the Constitution."
Welcome back to WallBuilders Live, Foundations of Freedom Thursday today. And we're addressing your questions. Thank you for sending them in, by the way. Send them to radio@wallbuilders.com. We're talking about the presidential race right now. David, our question was, what happens if you have several moderates that would be fighting over that particular vote, or too many conservatives fighting over that vote? And you were breaking it down. Go ahead.
What happens is, and by the way, on what I consider to be the conservative side, and there's a lot of folks you can put out there. You can put out Ted Cruz, you can put out Ben Carson, put out Bobby Jindal, put out Rick Perry, put out Mike Huckabee, however you want to do it. Any of those that you get, their voting record on most issues is going to be within 95% of each other. So while we like personalities, and while I know nearly every one of those guys, and some I'm much better friends with than others, and I can analyze all of them and say, here's where they're going to be weak, here's where they're going to be strong. There's something different this election that people don't understand. In previous elections, you can go into Iowa, you can win Iowa, you can get what's called earned media. In other words, 6 years ago, Mike Huckabee went in and won Iowa, and for the next month, everybody talks about how Huckabee won Iowa. Well, the coverage he got on that, the earned coverage from winning Iowa, equates to $5, $6, $7 million if he had to buy the TV time to talk about his candidacy. And then Rick Santorum goes in and he comes out with earned media. And so for a month, they get several $1 million worth of ads run by simply talking about them on TV, that these guys won. That's not going to happen this time. The way they have done this, they have front-loaded primaries in such a way that from the time you have Iowa, within the next 4 weeks, you will have 11 primaries. So you can't go park for 3 months in Iowa and win that state and then be covered in the news for the next month talking about you as the winner. You're going to have to leave there. You're going to have to immediately go to another state, have another primary, another primary. You're going to have 11 primaries within a month. And then within the next month, you're going to have another 13 primaries.
So you got to have the ability to be in, not all necessarily, but most of those states early on, like they used to do, just Iowa and New Hampshire.
Now, let me explain it this way. Each of those states you have to run differently because there are different issues. I mean, I was just with some of the presidential candidates. I'm very close to some of them, and we were just looking at polling. And you have the top maybe 10 issues, and everybody in the country says these are the top 10 issues. But in South Carolina, issue number 3 in that list is the top issue for them. But in New Hampshire, issue number 7 is the top issue for them. And when you get over to Iowa, issue number 4 is the top issue for them. And so the order of these issues change, which means that in each of those states, you run your media to align with your beliefs and values and how that aligns with their number one issue, whatever that is. So essentially what you're doing is you're running a governor's race in each state. Mike Huckabee, Bobby Jindal, Scott Walker, Jeb Bush, they're going to go into Iowa and run as if they're going to be elected the governor of Iowa is what they're going to do. Well, that means in a 2-month period of time, you have to run as a governor in 24 different states. Now, how much money does it take to run a contested governor's race? And these guys are going to be running for governor in Iowa against 12, 15 other candidates. How much money will that take? And then how much money is it going to take to go to the second, third, all the way to the 24th states? You're looking at needing somewhere in the vicinity of $50 to $70 million to even be a contender, not get elected, just to be a contender in that. And this is where the mods usually have it is, somebody like Jeb Bush walks in with $200 million. He doesn't have to come in first in any state at all. All he has to do is let these other guys fight it out till they run out of money, because if they got 50 or 70 million, he's got 200 million, he'll be the last one standing. And that's how Romney got it. It's not that the people chose him, it's that everybody else got out of the race before he did. He outlasted them all. That's what happened with McCain before him. It's not that Huckabee ran out of money, and so McCain wins by default. The same thing with Bob Dole. So the way that presidential primaries work is the last person standing is usually the one with the most money, and that's who your nominee will be. So in this particular occasion, if conservatives are going to split themselves between 10 or 12 different players and send their money to 10 or 12 different players, what they're doing is ensuring that a not conservative will be the nominee standing at the end, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but how do you prevent that from happening?
Well, how do you prevent that from happening? A couple of ways. Is you have to start saying from the beginning who is going to be a viable candidate, and a viable candidate is the one who can raise the money. The last presidential election was a $1 billion event. It is anticipated that this election will be a $5 billion event. How much money can you raise? So I look at some of these candidates, I say, they've never raised $1 million in their life. They can't raise $100 million. Right. And as much as I like them and love them, they have shown no ability to raise money. And so to expect that you can go in and spend $500,000 in Iowa and for the next month you're going to get $5 to $6 million to earn me, it's not going to happen this time. So you start saying, all right, who's viable? Then you also start saying, all right, where are they on the top 3 or 4 issues? Because if you look across the country right now, the polling that we've seen thus far, top issues are likability. Is this person liked? What are their negatives? The next issue, and that goes for all of these 17 or 18 guys, but number one, people say, I elect a president based on likability. Number 2, I elect a president based on leadership skills. Does he have executive experience? Has he already been a leader of some state or of some major entity? Number 3, I elect them on integrity and trustworthiness. Well, look at that, and there's a lot of these guys who have no experience with any executive field in any area. They've never led a state. They've never led anything major. People are looking for someone who has that experience. So that's another thing that I can use to help call out, because I know what the voters are going to choose when it gets to the end. I don't know who they'll choose, but I know the profile of what they're going to look at. And I also know that right now, demographics make a big difference. A Republican is going to have to get 35% of the Hispanic vote to win the presidency, and it's just that simple. And I look at a lot of these guys, and I know that they can't get 5 to 10% of the Hispanic vote. And I don't care what happens. I don't care how much evangelicals turn out. They will not win because of the demographics of the nation right now. So there's a lot of pragmatics I have to use, but again, I say that there's 10 or 12 of these guys that are out there that have beliefs that are very consistent, very close to what I have. And if I choose any one of the 10, I'm going to get a 95% same voting policy pattern. I'm going to get the same Supreme Court justices. I'm going to get the same response to the IRS and Obamacare. So now I'm looking for viability. So that's why having Romney and Jeb Bush and Christie and others, kind of fight on the other side helps, because it reduces some of the money they have available, just like it does for conservatives. But if conservatives are going to all get in there and beat each other up, then they're going to guarantee that whoever has the most money is going to be the nominee.
Do you think there's any chance of some of those higher profile conservatives coming together and deciding not to run and backing other ones, or maybe that happening soon instead of after Iowa, maybe in the Iowa caucus this summer instead of in the Iowa the Iowa straw poll this summer instead of the caucus in January or whenever it is?
I think what you'll see is starting about November, you're going to see a lot of national conservative groups come out saying we've joined together and this is our preference. And they're going to try to help direct some of their clientele and constituency to what they perceive as the most viable conservative candidate. And don't think that viability means they're not conservative. They're looking for conservatives who are viable, but they're going to say to their people, hey, we think all of our conservative groups need to get behind this conservative and help push them all the way through to be the nominee at the end.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting and exciting. The good news is there are some great conservatives out there that are viable, so looking for good things this year. Thanks, folks, for listening today. You've been listening to WallBuilders Live on Foundations of Freedom Thursday.
Thomas Jefferson said, "The Constitution of most of our states and of the United States assert that all power is inherent in the people, that they may exercise it by themselves, that it is their right and duty to be at all times armed, that they are entitled to freedom of person, freedom of religion, freedom of property, and freedom of press."
We stand undivided.